Today's story is so hauntingly beautiful, it might just make your heart ache. In the dusty heart of the Wild West, where the wind carves secrets into the red cliffs, one woman's escape becomes a collision of fate and survival. It all began with a single decision: to run. And that choice changed everything. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The desert had been punishing the land since first light, a relentless blaze pressing down on stone and sand alike. Heat shimmered off the rocks, turning the air thick and wavering, as if the world itself were breathing fire. By late afternoon, the light bled into copper tones, and the wind rose without warning, dragging dust from the flats and twisting it into clawing spirals that scraped at everything in their path. Clara Boone pulled her bonnet tighter beneath her chin, but it did little good. The wind cut through the cloth, flung grit into her eyes, split her lips until they burned and bled. She had been walking since morning, boots worn thin, soles cracked from weeks on the road. The canteen at her hip rattled hollow, its last swallow gone before noon. Every step grew heavier than the one before, her satchel biting into her shoulder like dead weight. She had come west with nothing but a frayed hope. Back in Missouri, the Boone family had tried to corner her into a marriage she could not endure, a bargain meant to settle debts instead of joining hearts. She had refused. For that refusal, she had been cast out. No home, no dowry, no seat at the table she had once known. When word reached her of an uncle in Arizona, she believed it might be her last mercy. But when she finally reached Clearwater Junction, a scorched little settlement barely worth a name, the truth struck her cold. Her uncle had been dead 2 years, his homestead burned to ash in a raid. She stayed one night at the saloon, spending her last coins on a stale meal and a narrow cot. The way the innkeeper's eyes lingered told her everything she needed to know about what would happen if she stayed. She would be traded like whiskey. Before dawn, she gathered her satchel and walked straight into the desert, believing she could reach Copper Bend 2 days east. It was a foolish hope. By late day, the wind turned savage, dust surging across the flats in blinding waves, erasing the horizon. The sun shrank into a red coin behind the storm. Clara coughed until her throat felt flayed raw, her lungs burning as though she had swallowed flame. The wind tore her bonnet free and swallowed it whole. Sand tangled in her hair, her knees buckled, and she staggered on by instinct alone. At last she saw a ring of stones, what remained of an old well. She collapsed beside it, fingers clawing at the half-buried bucket. It was dry, nothing but dust. Her vision swam, darkened at the edges. A distant thought crossed her mind. This is where I die. The desert will take me, and no one will ever know my name. A shadow slid across her. She blinked against the grit. A man stood before her, tall and unmoving against the storm. Broad shoulders draped in deerskin, long dark hair bound at the nape with a leather tie. A rifle rested in his hand as naturally as an extension of his arm. His face, carved by sun and wind, revealed nothing. Dark, steady eyes studied her without haste. Clara tried to speak, but only a rasp escaped. She lifted her empty canteen, shaking it once. The man crouched without a word, drew a water skin from his belt, and pressed it to her lips. She drank greedily, water spilling down her chin until his hand tightened and pulled it away. "Enough," he said, his voice low but firm, carrying even through the storm. "Too much, and you'll be sick." It was the first kindness she had known in weeks. There was no softness in his tone, only certainty. His voice carried an accent she couldn't place, measured and deliberate, shaped by a world far from hers. Her pulse jumped, fear skittering across her skin, yet beneath it lay a deeper relief she couldn't deny. He cast a quick glance toward the churning horizon, then swung the rifle across his back. Without asking, he bent and lifted her, as if she weighed no more than a child. Clara tried to protest, to say she could walk, but her strength failed her. Her head slipped against his shoulder, her body giving in at last. Through the howl of sand and wind, she caught the steady rhythm of his breathing, the sure cadence of his boots striking the desert floor. They reached a ridge where a half-built cabin crouched beneath a stand of cottonwoods, clinging to their shelter like a stubborn thing refusing to be driven off. A faint ribbon of smoke curled from a fire pit. He pushed open the rough-cut door and carried her inside, lowering her carefully onto a narrow cot made of pine poles and blankets. Clara blinked, eyes adjusting to the dimness. The cabin was spare and unfinished, but it wasn't wild or cruel. Tools hung neatly along the walls. A bow and quiver rested above the door. Strips of leather lay across the table, half worked into reins or moccasins. A clay jug sat near the fire, half full of water. The air carried the clean scent of smoke and cedar. He poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her. This time she drank slowly, forcing her shaking hand to steady. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice torn and hoarse. He didn't answer. He took a stool near the wall, settled with the rifle resting across his knees, and watched her while the storm raged outside. "My name is Clara Boone," she said at last, her voice firmer now. "From Missouri." Silence stretched between them. "You saved my life," she added. "I owe you." After a long moment, he spoke. "Cade." The name fit him, plain and strong. Clara nodded faintly. "Cade." She pulled her satchel close. "I was trying to reach Copper Bend. Thought I could make it." He studied her, eyes narrowing in thought. "Copper Bend is 2 days on foot," he said. "You wouldn't have lasted." The blunt truth cut sharper than the sand. She glanced down at her torn dress, her blistered hands. Once she had been a merchant's daughter, a piano in the parlor and clean floors beneath her feet. Now she was a woman dragged half dead from the desert. Cade rose and crossed to the fire, stirring the coals and feeding another log to the flame. In the firelight, his features came into clearer view, strong lines, younger than she had expected. Perhaps 30, yet carrying the weight of a man who had seen more than his share. His silence wasn't empty. It was patient. "You can stay until the storm passes," he said at last. "After that, you go your way." Clara's heart sank. She had no way. No uncle, no money, no safe road ahead. And Silas Crow, her stomach tightened at the thought. One of Crow's men could already be searching for her. How could she explain that to this stranger? Would he turn her out if he knew trouble trailed her steps? "Thank you," she said instead, forcing calm. "That will be enough." Even as the words left her mouth, she knew they were false. The storm outside was only the beginning. She had crossed into a place where her past and his future were about to collide, where survival would demand more than a moment of mercy. And though she couldn't yet see it, the instant she collapsed beneath his shadow at the well, her life had shifted beyond repair. The storm broke during the night, leaving the land scrubbed raw by the desert wind. Morning broke thin and colorless, the air brittle with dust and the faint bite of smoke. Clara Boone woke beneath a coarse wool blanket, every muscle aching, yet the simple truth settled in. She was alive. For a few breaths, she didn't remember where she was. Above her, the roof was nothing but rough-hewn timber. A square window cut light into the wall. The floor beneath her boots was packed earth, hard and cold. Then it all came rushing back, the storm, the dry well, the dark shape that had lifted her out of the chaos. Cade. He was still there. He sat near the door with the rifle laid across his knees, unmoving. He hadn't slept. His dark eyes tracked her as she stirred, offering no greeting. Outside, a single bird called, sharp and lonely, the only sound left in the quiet. Clara pushed herself upright. "I should thank you again," she said, her voice scraped, raw with sand and thirst. Cade dipped his head once. The silence pressed down on her, heavy and awkward. Back in Missouri, words had been her shield, polite turns of phrase, the careful manners of a merchant's daughter. Here, they carried little weight. "I'll be on my way soon," she added, though her heart sank as she said it. He set the rifle aside and stood, moving with the slow, deliberate ease of a man shaped by quiet places. "Where will you go?" "Copper Bend," she answered, even though the name felt empty in her mouth. He studied her for a moment. 2 days on foot if you know the land," he said. "Longer if you don't. You won't make it alone." She stiffened, stung by his bluntness. "I've managed this far." "You nearly died yesterday," he replied, plain and calm. She couldn't argue with that, her hands twisted together in her lap. She had nowhere waiting for her, no uncle, no coin, no kin. Admitting it felt like laying her throat bare. Cade turned to the table where strips of leather lay and picked one up, working it between his fingers. "The land isn't empty," he said after a moment. "It's watched, claimed. If you walk into it alone, you won't last. Men will look at you the way they look at land, something to take." Her breath caught. She knew he was right. Silas Crow's face flared in her thoughts. The hungry eyes, the way he had cornered her near Clearwater Junction, murmuring promises she had never believed. She had fled before Crow's men could seal her fate. The idea of him finding her again sent a chill through her. Cade's gaze snapped to her, sharp, as if he had sensed the thought. "You're running from someone." The words struck hard. She hesitated. Pride urged her to stay silent, but survival won. "Yes, a man. Wealthy. Powerful. He wants what I won't give." Cade's jaw tightened, though his face stayed unreadable. He set the leather down and turned back to her. "Then you can't go to Copper Bend. His men will be watching the trails. The desert is wide, but not wide enough to hide a woman on her own." Her throat went dry. "Then what choice do I have?" Cade held her gaze, steady and unyielding, and the silence between them felt heavier than the storm that had nearly killed her. Firelight glinted in his eyes, and for the first time Clara thought she saw more than stone there. Not hardness alone, but a patience worn thin by years of carrying too much. "I've claimed this land," Cade said at last. "My father's father lived here before the soldiers came." He spoke of it plainly, without heat. "The government says I must prove it. Live here with a family, make it a home." He swept a hand toward the unfinished cabin around them. "So I build. Alone, the claim is weak. With a wife, the law can't deny it." Clara stared, the meaning rolling over her like thunder from distant hills. A wife. Cade didn't look away. "On paper only," he said. "I won't touch what isn't freely given, but the law sees a woman at my side, and the land becomes mine. In return, you have a roof, food, protection. When your danger passes, you're free to leave." Her heart hammered. Marriage to a stranger, an Apache, felt unthinkable, scandalous. Back in Missouri, it would have ruined her beyond repair. But Missouri lay 1,000 miles behind her. Here, in the Arizona Territory, names and reputations meant little. Survival meant everything. She lowered her gaze to her torn dress, her blistered hands. Alone, she was no more than dust waiting for the wind. With him, she might last. "You're asking a great deal," she whispered. Cade held her eyes, steady as bedrock. "I'm offering a great deal. I won't ask twice." Her chest tightened as the choice pressed down on her. The bargain felt reckless, yet the desert had nearly taken her life, and Silas Crow's shadow still stretched close. At last, she lifted her chin. "If I agree, there will be conditions." Cade inclined his head. "Say them." "I'll have my own room," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "Done. And I'll have a fair say in this household. How we live, how we keep it." "Reasonable. And if the day comes when I want to leave, you won't hold me here by force." His eyes darkened, something old flickering there. For a long breath, she thought he might refuse. Then he spoke. "I won't keep what doesn't wish to stay," he said, "but I don't give my word lightly. Marriage, even in name, is no small thing." Clara nodded slowly. Silence settled between them, broken only by the soft hiss of the fire. At last, Cade stepped back, as if marking the boundary they had drawn. Then it settled. The breath left her in a shudder. She felt trapped and freed all at once, like stepping off a cliff and finding wings in the fall. Outside, the desert stretched wide and merciless. Inside those rough walls, a bargain had been made. It bound two strangers across lines of culture, history, and loss, an alliance born not of love, but of need. Yet, as Clara eased back onto the cot, her heart refused to quiet. In the weight of Cade's gaze, she had seen more than necessity. She had seen a man fighting to hold his place in a world determined to erase him, and perhaps, within that fight, she might find her own. After the storm, the desert softened, as if ashamed of the violence it had unleashed. Days grew scorching, nights sharp with cold, and the sky stretched endless above them, blue and pitiless by day, jeweled with stars by night. In that wide hush, Clara Boone and Cade began the uneasy work of sharing a life. The cabin carried the clean bite of cedar and smoke, the floor harsh beneath Clara's boots. At first, every groan of timber and every stretch of quiet between them felt strange. She had grown up in rooms alive with sound, merchants bargaining, sisters laughing, a piano carrying on into the night. Here, words were scarce, spent like hard-earned coin. Cade spoke only when he had to, his silence a wall she couldn't climb. But need has a way of stripping away pretense. On the first morning, Clara tried to cook from the meager stores he kept: cornmeal, beans, dried venison. What she made came out thick and nearly inedible. Cade ate it without complaint, though his face told the truth. "You can do better," he said, plain and calm. "I suppose I'll have to," she shot back, stung but set on proving it. By the third morning, she turned out a pan of cornbread that warmed the room. Cade said nothing. Didn't offer praise. But she noticed when he reached for a second piece. It was victory enough. Each dawn, he left with his rifle slung across his back, and Clara watched from the porch. He moved with a grace that seemed born of the land itself, every step sure and silent. Some days he hunted, others he worked the cabin's frame, hauling logs and setting them with a strength that looked endless. Clara tried to help, even when her hands blistered and bled. "You're not made for this," he told her once, seeing her raw palms. "I'm not made to be helpless either," she snapped. He studied her then, not unkindly, as if seeing her anew. After that, he gave her smaller tasks: shaping pegs, mixing mud for chinking, patching leather. The work steadied her, gave her something solid to set her pride against. In return, she began teaching him letters. At first, he refused. "Words on paper won't stop a man's bullet," he said. "No," she answered, "but they can stop a man's lies." That gave him pause, and he agreed. Evenings by the fire, she traced words onto rough parchment: land, claim, cabin. His hand, unused to the pen, moved clumsily at first, but his eyes never left the page. Patience lived in him, deeper than she had known in anyone. Within weeks, he could sign his name firm and clear: Cade. When she praised him one night, he only shrugged. "A name on paper doesn't change what I am." "No," she said softly, meeting his gaze across the firelight. "But it proves what you already are. A man with a place, a man who belongs." For the first time, she thought she saw something flicker in his eyes. Not pride exactly, but something close to hope. Still, not everything fit easily between them. Their habits clashed more than once. She folded clothes into neat stacks. He left his things wherever they fell. She wanted to scrub the floor, to make the cabin proper. He said dust was a part of living, not something to battle. Once, when she moved a hunting spear from the doorway, he snapped, sharp and sudden, "Don't touch what you don't understand." The words cut deep. Clara withdrew to the far side of the cabin, anger burning hot in her chest. Later that night, his voice softened. "That spear is older than I am," Cade said. "My father, Old Bear, made it. I keep it there so I remember." Clara listened, shame settling over her skin. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "You couldn't," he replied, simple and calm. "But now you do." Slowly their worlds began to touch at the edges. Once, she told him about her father's business back east, the collapse that drove the Boone family into desperation, the marriage they tried to force on her. Bitterness crept into her voice as she spoke, her words trembling with memory. Cade listened, his face closed, until at last he said, "You chose freedom. There's a cost to that choice. You're paying it, but you're alive." Alive. The word struck her harder than she expected. As summer thinned, nights grew colder. They slept in separate corners, as they had agreed, yet the walls seemed to draw them closer all the same. One night, coyotes cried near the cabin, and Clara woke shaking. Cade fed the fire and kept watch until dawn. He said nothing about her fear, but she noticed how he placed his rifle within easy reach of her bed. Another time, she went alone to fetch water from the creek, slipped on the bank, and nearly fell. Cade caught her wrist as she slid, hauling her back with a strength that stole her breath. For a moment their faces were close, his grip firm around her hand. She saw something in his eyes she couldn't name. He released her quickly, stepping back as though distance were armor. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of their days bound them together. From dawn to dusk they worked. From dusk to night they shared silence, or words that came slow but honest. Clara learned to ride the small, dun horse tethered near the cottonwoods. Cade taught her how to listen for water beneath stone, how to read the tracks of deer and coyote. In return, she showed him how to keep accounts in a ledger, how to measure their stores so nothing went to waste. One evening, when the fire burned low, she lifted a small harmonica she had carried all the way from Missouri and played. The notes wavered, rough from disuse, yet they filled the cabin with a softness that tightened her throat. Cade watched her, his face unreadable, until she finished. "That's a good sound," he said quietly. "It reminds me of home," she whispered. "Isn't this home?" He gestured around the half-built cabin, the bare walls, the desert pressing close. Her answer caught in her throat. "Not yet," she said at last. Cade nodded, as if he understood more than she could say. And the days kept turning. What began as necessity slowly, almost against their will, became something else, a shared rhythm, a trust fragile but real. Clara no longer felt like a stranger in the cabin. She belonged to the work, to the quiet, to the unspoken bond growing between them. Neither of them named it, but they both knew. The alliance forged in desperation was becoming something far harder to define. The first warnings came subtle, like crows circling high in a clear sky. One morning, Cade found boot tracks near the creek, too deep, too careless to be his own. Another evening, the mule grew restless, ears twitching at shadows beyond the cottonwoods. Clara noticed the change in him, the way his shoulders tightened, the way he kept his rifle closer than before. She noticed the way his eyes kept drifting to the horizon, even while they sat over supper. Once, she asked, "Are you expecting someone?" He only replied, "The desert has many eyes," and said no more. But she knew. The memory of Clearwater Junction clung to her like smoke that wouldn't clear. Silas Crow had not let go. Men like him never did. They didn't surrender what they believed belonged to them. Clara felt the dread growing inside her, waiting for the day his reach stretched this far. That fear found its voice one late afternoon when a rider appeared on the ridge. Clara was tending the fire when she heard the heavy, deliberate beat of hooves. She went still. Cade stepped outside with his rifle in hand, his posture calm yet ready. The rider was a broad man in a fine coat, wide-brimmed hat pulled low, his horse sleek and restless beneath him. Even before he spoke, Clara knew who it was. Silas Crow. "Well now," he drawled, reining in near the cabin door. "Didn't expect to find you this far from town, Clara Boone." His eyes slid over her, lingering too long, then shifted to Cade. "And in the company of a redskin, no less." Clara's throat tightened, but she forced her voice steady. "You have no business here, Mr. Crow." Crow chuckled, low and cold. "Everything west of Clearwater is my business, especially when it comes to runaways and squatters." Cade didn't move. "This land is mine." Crow sneered. "Government might not see it that way, but maybe there's a solution." His gaze cut back to Clara. "You hand over the girl, and I'll forget I ever saw this cabin." Her stomach turned. She started to speak, but Cade answered first, his voice level and firm. "She's my wife." The words hung between them, heavy as the heat in the air. Clara's heart lurched, though she knew the truth of it was only on paper. Crow's smile twisted. "A wife, is it?" he said. "How charming. A Missouri girl playing squaw." His eyes gleamed. "You think that'll stand up in court? You really think folks will side with you over me?" Cade lifted his rifle a fraction, not aiming, just enough. "Right on." For a long, tight moment, Crow's gaze flicked between them. Then he laughed, sharp as a whip crack. "This ain't over. The law bends for men like me." He nudged his horse around. "We'll see how strong your little paper marriage is when I'm done." With that, he rode off, dust boiling in his wake. Clara sagged against the doorframe, her knees weak. Cade lowered the rifle, his face set like carved stone. "He'll be back," she whispered. "Yes," he said. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay staring at the rough beams above, listening to the soft crackle of the fire and the steady rhythm of Cade's breathing across the room. At last, she rose and sat by the hearth, shadows stretching long over her face. "You knew this would happen," she said quietly. Cade opened his eyes. He hadn't been asleep. "Crow isn't the first man to want what isn't his." She studied him in the flickering firelight. He looked both younger and older. Young in the strength of his shoulders, old in the weight carried in his eyes. "What did you mean?" she asked, "when you talked about court, about the law bending?" His jaw tightened as if weighing whether to answer. Finally he spoke. "My father, Old Bear, built on this land 20 years ago. He raised walls, planted corn, proved the soil." He paused. "When the soldiers came, they burned it down, said the papers were lost, said we had no claim." His voice stayed flat, worn smooth by years of telling the same truth. "Silas Crow's father had been there," he said. "He took what he never earned. And now the son has come to finish the theft." Clara's throat tightened. She saw it clearly then, the wound beneath the story, deeper than any scar. This wasn't only one man's fight for land. It was a long chain of betrayal, of lives pushed aside and erased. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Cade shook his head once. "Sorry doesn't change what was taken." He looked at her then, steady and unflinching. "You need to understand. This isn't just about staying alive. It's about justice. If I lose this land again, my father's fight dies with me." The fire snapped, sparks leaping upward like scattered stars. The truth settled heavy in Clara's chest. She had thought their bargain was for shelter, for protection, for a roof against the desert. It was more than that. She had stepped into a struggle that had begun long before she ever arrived, one that would not end quietly. In the days that followed, the tension thickened. Twice more, Cade found signs near the creek. Boot prints pressed deep into the soil, a crushed cigar stub, once even a scrap of cloth torn on a thorn bush. Clara learned to keep the rifle close, though her hands trembled every time she touched it. At night, when coyotes cried and the wind groaned against the walls, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. And yet, when she looked at Cade, solid, unmoving, rooted like stone, something in her refused to regret the choice. One evening, as they patched the cabin roof, she finally asked, "If Silas Crow comes back, if he brings men, what will you do?" Cade set the hammer down, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "I'll stand. And if standing means dying." He turned to her then, and for the first time the hardness in his face softened, just a fraction. "Then I'll die where my father lived. But I don't think Crow expects me to stand with a wife beside me." Her heart stumbled at the word, wife. She opened her mouth, closed it, then said, "Then he underestimates you, and me." Cade studied her, his gaze unreadable, before turning back to his work. But the air between them had shifted. That night, as Clara lay awake listening to the desert's restless breathing, she understood the truth. What they had agreed to was no longer only about survival. It was about belonging, about choosing to fight, not just for land or a name, but for each other. And on the far edge of the horizon, old shadows were gathering. For the first time, Clara felt a strength rise in her chest that wasn't borrowed or forced, but her own. The days after Crow's visit felt like waiting for a storm that refused to break. The desert lay deceptively calm, the sky wide and blue, but every movement Cade made carried tension. He kept the rifle loaded, a knife always at his belt, his eyes never resting. Clara felt it too. When she went to the creek, she swore she heard branches snap where no deer stood. At night, the silence pressed in too close, as if listening. Even the coyotes grew scarce. One evening, Cade returned from scouting the ridges, his jaw tight. 3 men, he said. Crow's men. They're watching. Clara's stomach dropped. What do we do? We finish the cabin. Make it ready. She searched his face. Ready for what? For war. His gaze didn't waver. They worked harder than ever. By day, they cut timber, sealed cracks with mud, and braced the door with heavy beams. By night, they stacked supplies close: water, dried meat, ammunition. Clara's hands blistered and her muscles burned, but she didn't complain. If the cabin was going to be their shield, Clara Boone meant to raise it with her own hands. Cade showed her how to handle the rifle, patient but unyielding. Hold it steady. Breathe, he told her. Don't fear the kick. It's only wood and iron. The first shot went wide, the crack echoing off the rocks. Birds exploded from the trees, and Clara muttered a curse under her breath. Cade didn't comment. He simply adjusted her grip, his hands firm over hers. The second shot struck true, the tin can clattering off the fence post. A smile tugged at her mouth before she could stop it. Cade gave the slightest nod. By week's end, Clara could load and fire without shaking. She prayed she would never have to use the skill, yet a quiet pride settled in her chest. She was no longer the helpless girl who had stumbled into the desert. The attack came 3 nights later. The air was bone dry, the moon no more than a thin blade in the sky. Clara woke to the smell of smoke. For a heartbeat, she thought she was dreaming. Then Cade was beside her, his hand tight on her shoulder. He whispered, calm but urgent. She rose with her heart pounding as smoke curled through the seams in the walls. Cade eased to the door and peered through the gap. They're here, he murmured. Clara's chest clenched. How many? 4. Silas Crow with them. Through the cracks, she saw fire licking along the corral fence, men advancing with torches raised. Silas Crow's voice carried on the wind. Burn them out. I'll see his land turn to ash, same as his father's. Cade's jaw set. He met Clara's eyes. Stay low. Don't open the door unless I fall. No, she said, surprising herself. I won't cower. If this is our fight, it's mine too. They held each other's gaze. Then Cade gave a short nod. So be it. The first torch struck the wall, flames crawling up the logs. Cade kicked the door wide and leveled the rifle. The shot split the night. One of Crow's men dropped, his torch tumbling into the dirt. Shouts erupted. Horses screamed. Clara seized the water bucket and threw it against the burning wall. Her arms shook, but she kept moving. Another torch sailed through the window and landed near the bed. She stamped it out, coughing on smoke. Outside, gunfire cracked again. Cade fired, reloaded, fired. His movements matched to his breath. Clara knelt beside him, hands clumsy with cartridges. He didn't look at her, but when she pressed the rifle back into his grip, his fingers brushed hers in a brief, wordless thanks. Silas Crow's voice thundered through the chaos. Come out, Cade. You can't hold against me. The law is mine. The land is mine. Burn or crawl. It ends tonight, Cade answered, his voice like stone. This land is my father's. My blood. You will not take it. A shot slammed close, splintering the doorframe. Clara flinched, then steadied. She lifted the second rifle, breath tight in her chest. Through the smoke, a figure rushed from the shadows with a torch raised. She aimed and squeezed the trigger. The man fell hard, sparks scattering into the dirt. Her hands trembled and her ears rang, but the cabin still stood. Cade glanced at her for only a heartbeat, and in his eyes she saw it. Not doubt, not fear, but recognition. Not of weakness, but of strength, while the fight raged on. Flames crawled along the walls, smoke biting at their eyes. Then Silas Crow burst from the darkness, pistol flaring, his face twisted with rage. Cade met him head-on, his rifle empty, his stance unbroken. They slammed together in the dirt beneath the desert moon, fists and fury tangling. Clara's heart seized. She snatched the empty rifle and swung as a man lunged for her. The butt connected, sending him sprawling. She turned just in time to see Crow drive Cade down, a knife flashing in his hand. "Your father died with nothing," Crow spat, "and you'll join him tonight." Clara screamed. Without thinking, she seized the pistol lying in the dust, leveled it, and fired. The shot split the night. Crow froze, surprise stamped across his face, then folded beside the flames. Silence followed, broken only by the hiss of burning wood. The last of Crow's men fled into the dark, their shouts thinning to nothing. Cade pushed himself up, chest heaving. Clara let the pistol fall, her hands shaking. He looked at her, firelight fierce in his eyes. "You saved me," he said low. She swallowed, her throat raw. "We saved each other." By dawn, the fire was dead. The cabin wore its wounds, blackened walls, a scorched roof, but it stood. Clara leaned against the doorway, spent, soot streaking her face. Cade stood beside her, watching the sun climb over the desert. "This isn't finished," he said quietly. "Crow had money, men. Others may come." Clara met his gaze, her voice steady despite the ache in her body. "Then let them. I won't run again." Cade turned fully to her. For the first time, the hardness in him eased, giving way to something deep and unguarded. He reached out, his calloused hand brushing hers, warm and sure. In the pale light of that burned morning, Clara knew the truth. What began as a bargain had become a bond, more than shelter, more than survival, something forged in fire. Whatever storms waited ahead, they would face them together. The desert dawn, after the blaze, lay gray with smoke. The horizon smudged as if night itself had bled into morning. Clara stood in the doorway of the scarred cabin, her dress singed at the hem, her hands raw from hours of hauling water and stamping embers. Exhaustion trembled through her, yet the cabin still stood, charred, broken in places, just as she and Cade still stood. Cade returned from the ridge with the rifle across his back. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, streaked with blood and soot. He had gone to be certain the last of Crow's men were gone. He stopped at the threshold, his eyes moving over the cabin, over Clara, then meeting her gaze. "They won't be back soon," he said, hoarse but steady. She nodded. The answer was written in his face. He had lived long enough on this land to know when men were beaten. Silas Crow was dead. His men were scattered. For now, they were safe. Safe. The word felt strange on her tongue. Cade stepped inside and ran his hand along the blackened wall. "We rebuild," he said. Clara straightened, weariness giving way to resolve. "Yes," she answered. "We do." Clara Boone felt her throat tighten. She had half expected him to talk of leaving, of walking away from ground scorched by fire and hatred. But Cade's answer never changed. Stand, endure, remain. She swallowed. "Yes," she said. "We rebuild." The days that followed were heavy with work. Together they pulled down the worst of the burned beams, patched the roof, sealed the walls against wind and dust. Clara's hands blistered, her arms ached deep into the bone, but she worked beside Cade without a word of complaint. At night they sank onto the floor, too worn to speak, listening to the desert murmur around them. Once, people from a nearby Apache camp came. Quiet, observant. They brought roof poles and left with few words. An old woman paused before going, pressing a weathered hand to Clara's cheek, her eyes sharp as a hawk's. Then she turned away. Clara could not tell if it was a blessing or a warning. From town came whispers carried by travelers. Silas Crow's name spat like a curse, his dealings dragged into the open. Some said he had finally met the justice he deserved. Others muttered that an Apache had murdered him in cold blood. Clara knew the truth. But truth in the West was a fragile thing, bent by power and prejudice. Cade paid the talk no mind. He built. Every log he set, every nail he drove, was his answer to the world. And Clara found herself falling into his rhythm, letting her strength answer his. One evening, weeks after the fire, they sat on the porch rebuilt from salvaged boards. The air was cool. The desert stretched gold and red beneath a sinking sun. Clara held the harmonica in her lap, turning it slowly between her fingers. "It almost feels like a home," she said. Cade watched the horizon. "It is a home." The word landed hard. Simple, unadorned, yet heavier than any vow spoken before a preacher. Home. She raised the harmonica and played a slow tune her mother used to hum while mending clothes. The notes drifted out into the open land, soft and aching. When she finished, Cade was watching her, his gaze unreadable but gentle. "I haven't heard music like that since I was a boy," he said. "I thought it might remind you of something better," she replied. He was quiet for a moment. "It reminds me that not all is lost." The words settled deep in her chest. She looked at him. This man who had carried her through a storm, fought beside her in fire, and now built a life from ashes, and realized she no longer thought of her stay as temporary. "Cade," she said softly, "when we made this bargain, I meant to leave, when it was safe, when I could." Her voice faltered, but she held his gaze. "Now, I don't want to." For the first time, his expression broke, his lips parting, his eyes narrowing with something like surprise. He leaned closer, his voice low. "And if I ask not for a bargain, not for safety, but for truth, would you stay then?" Her heart answered before her mind could. "Yes," she breathed. "For truth, I would stay." He reached for her slowly, like dawn spreading across the land, and took her hand. His calloused fingers closed around hers, firm and gentle. The silence between them was no longer empty, but full of promise, of something fragile and fierce at once. And so the seasons turned. The cabin grew sturdier with time, a second room rising beside the first. Near the creek, they cleared ground for planting. Clara Boone learned how to coax beans from stubborn soil, how to tend chickens that scratched and clucked in the dust. Cade taught her to ride farther into the open land, to hunt with a bow as well as a rifle. Between them, something deepened, never spoken aloud, yet unmistakable. When Clara laughed, rare but bright, he watched her with eyes that softened without him noticing. When he came back from hunting, sunburned and worn, she set water before him without a word. Their lives braided together like roots beneath the earth. Some nights Clara thought of Missouri, the wide porch, the piano in the parlor, the Boone family that had turned her away. It felt like a life lived by someone else. Here, in this scarred but steadfast land, she had found something she had never known before. Choice. She had chosen this place, chosen this man, chosen herself. The day came when a government inspector rode out, ledger tucked beneath his arm. He studied the cabin, the fields, the animals, asked questions, made careful notes. His gaze was cautious, the look of a man who measured lives in ink and paper. Cade stood straight, Clara at his side. When the inspector asked, "And this is your wife?" Cade's hand found hers, steady and sure. Clara lifted her chin. "Yes," she said clearly. "I am." The inspector nodded, scribbled, then closed the book. Looks like the claim is solid. Keep at it, and the land will be yours." When he rode away, Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Cade squeezed her hand once, then released it, though the warmth lingered long after. That evening they walked to the creek as the sky burned red and gold. Clara knelt, letting her fingers trail through the cool water. Cade stood beside her in silence before speaking. "My father dreamed of this," he said. "A home, a place that couldn't be taken. I thought it was lost." She rose slowly, her dress brushing the grass. "Now it's found," she said. He turned to her, the fire of sunset reflected in his eyes. "Found with you." Her heart swelled. Without thinking, she stepped closer. He bent his head, and their lips met. Tentative at first, then sure. The kiss carried everything they had never said, everything forged through fire, labor, and quiet resolve. When they parted, the desert stood still around them, the sky vast and open above. For the first time, Clara did not feel like a wanderer surviving on chance. She felt rooted, like a woman standing on ground she could finally call her own. Cade took her hand again, his voice calm and certain. "We are home." She knew it was true. The cabin, the creek, the wide and unforgiving desert, it was all theirs, not given, not borrowed, not begged for, built with sweat, courage, and a love that had grown fierce and unshakable, a home of their own. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening, and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths, some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us, subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories, from our hearts to yours. Thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso legal interim. Disclaimer: each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances. Although AI tools assist us in visuals, narration, and script development, the emotional tone, editing, and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies, using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.